Present.
Vice Chair Frank,
Present.
Commissioner Madera,
Here.
Commissioner Alan Thomas,
Present.
Commissioner Noble,
Present.
Commissioner Guardiola,
Present.
Commissioner Hurst, Commissioner Hurst. I see him, but he might have us muted. Commissioner Grimes,
Present.
Commissioner Smith,
Present.
Commissioner Fairfield,
Present.
Commissioner Tedesco, Commissioner Lewis.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, trying to see, do we have everybody? Do we have a vacancy or absences?
Looks like Commissioner Tedesco is absent from the meeting at this point.
This time I'm looking for a motion to excuse those members not present. Commissioner Alan Thomas,
Make a motion to approve the members not present.
thank you. Commissioner Frank,
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Councilman Hurst,
I apologize. I got booted. I am here.
thank you. I have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Madera,
Yes.
Commissioner Alan Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Noble,
Yes.
Commissioner Guardiola,
Yes.
Commissioner Hurst,
Yes.
Commissioner Grimes,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Fairfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Frank,
Yes.
Chair Huseman.
Yes,
Passes 11 in the affirmative and 1 excused.
thank you. Next on the agenda is Resolution URA 2020-04, which is a resolution approving the Second Amendment to the PRA and Fifth Amendment to the PSA. Will Robert Sheasley please make the presentation?
Thank you, Chair Huseman. My name is Robert Sheasley. I'm the General Counsel to the URA Board as well as the City Attorney. I'm joined tonight by Caitlin Quander, who's your Special Counsel on this transaction. To say we're just approving a resolution makes it sound so simple. I'm going to go through this presentation tonight. As we get very close to closing here, the scheduled closing date is to happen before September 1. And there's no adjustment to that deadline, but there are obviously a lot of moving pieces, particularly with the type of financing involved to achieve the affordable housing component of the Greyhound Park development. As I go through this, I want to highlight the key points of what we're doing, but the overall focus is to request amendments of the 2 key agreements to look at the structure of the transaction and obtain the board's consent to that structure, essentially, and the assignment of some obligations. And then continue to, within the parameters, kind of present it to the board this evening, push some obligations and authority down to the staff level, to the executive director level for some of the related agreements that will enable this to close and start developing very soon. I understand before we start the presentation, there is a signature on the public improvement agreement, which is part of the subdivision plat, which is one of the big major development milestones. And that document is winding its way through the city currently and should be recorded here shortly. So please interrupt at any point here. The document you're approving tonight is a resolution that has all of those key points in it. And Dylan, if you would share that screen, please, with the presentation.
Yep, I'll do that right now, Mr. Sheasley.
And I will be handling the bulk of this. Ms. Quander is far savvier on the loan terms and most of these, but let me work through this. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, these are the things we're going to go over tonight. We are pushing towards that closing deadline, and these are the key items that the developers requested to update to get to that closing point. Next slide, please. And as we know, the structure that we're working under currently, we have a company called Greyhound Park LLC, also known as Del West, essentially, an affiliated company of Del West, that is our redeveloper. And their job is to construct the infrastructure, roads, drainage, park, et cetera, and then sell the tracks they're buying or develop those tracks. And the URA is going to be retaining the parts on the west side of the development for the educational parcel and commercial parcel. We executed last July the phased redevelopment agreement with them and a purchase and sale agreement, and that's been amended over the last year as we work through a number of the development issues. And next slide, please. And that is what the plat looks like. This has been worked on for the last year and will be recorded soon. But as you can see on the left side of the screen, tracks A and B are the ones the URA is going to retain. And then as you go to the east, you see all the roads that are going to be developed. Right in the middle is track E, just for orientation. And that's going to be partly drainage and partly a park area. That's a central park for this area. You'll see that comes up later when we talk about tracks A and B in a maintenance agreement. Because the entirety of the site needs to contribute to the operation of that facility. To the bottom there, you see track D2. That is the first parcel that should be developed, I believe, with the affordable housing component that is driving much of the changes tonight, given the complexity of affordable housing financing. Getting that underway has been a critical piece and requiring some of the major structural changes. So you'll see that hopefully moving soon as well. And then again, off to the right on the far side is tract G, which is a regional stormwater facility. The city is contributing funding to that through the URA because it's a facility primarily to take stormwater from adjacent areas, not the Greyhound Park itself. Next slide, please. And so the key amendments that we're going to talk about tonight are in the development agreement and the purchase and sale agreement. Essentially, that D2 lot is, as I mentioned, drives a significant part of the changes tonight. One of the things that the board requested was a guarantee of performance, essentially, a way to have a hammer to push the developer, the redeveloper, to move forward with the development. That was negotiated last year to be in a right of repurchase concept, where if certain construction wasn't done, the horizontal infrastructure wasn't done by a certain point, or some other defaults occurred in the timeline, then the URA could repurchase the property that it's selling to Del West for simply the cost of the improvements that were built to serve that tract. Because of the financing for the affordable housing component, the request is to exclude tract D2 from that right of repurchase. We believe that the financing and the movement behind this project makes there sufficient guarantee for the board to accept the risk of performance there. And there are a number of tens of millions of dollars on top of what the URA has contributed going into this particular part of the project that makes it likely that the project would be completed. The other part is for the remainder of the parcels on the second bullet point there, the right to repurchase would be below the rights of other lenders, superior liens, essentially. If there are lenders that have a right to the property or that have loaned money or provided something before the URA could repurchase the property, they would have to work through those liens in the rankings. And then finally, we've clarified when the right to repurchase expires, it being upon the acceptance of the improvements. This is, again, the roadway and the drainage and park infrastructure. However, the URA would still have the right to consent to a sale of those parcels to an entity that's not affiliated with Del West or Greyhound Park until they have actually built something and a certificate of occupancy has been issued on that tract. If I can just make sure that, Ms. Quander, did I do anything incorrectly? Did I describe the right to repurchase incorrectly at all?
No, that was perfect. That's right. I think you described it well. We feel confident at a staff level that D2 is really primed and ready to go, and so felt much more comfortable with that request from Del West in order to line up their financing. It was a major objection from a number of the financing parties to have a right of repurchase burden or cloud that title. And because the affordable on D2 is so ready to go, we felt confident on that piece, and the rest is correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying not to get too into the weeds on these items, but I want to make sure that the board has the opportunity to ask questions. So please feel free to interrupt.
One final point
Sure.
for the board, as part of that negotiation to revisit this term, Del West is additionally putting up another $200,000 into the escrow, which could be utilized if the URA did need to exercise a right of repurchase in the future because of a default. So that was some additional kind of security that's being provided by Del West in exchange for these changes.
Thank you. So the ensuring the redeveloper's skin in the game is very real. I think at this point they have expended significant funds and are contributing additional amounts to make those guarantees for the URA. The other key component is moving the infrastructure deadline. Again, roads, streetlights, drainage, et cetera, and water lines. Moving that out to be about a full year, from 240 days to 360 days, based on their contractor schedule and with the threat of winter. We believe that's appropriate to make sure that they have the work done in the ample time to do the work to match their contractor's schedule. The next item, Exhibit C, is a statement of all of the improvements essentially required that the developer is supposed to build and how that gets paid for through the various funding components that the URA and the city and the debris developer are putting in. Because we have now platted the property and executed a public improvement agreement, there's a likelihood that we can confirm that everything has been built. And so we're requesting that the executive director be granted authority to restate that exhibit, simply to confirm that all those items are included and that the parties can have certainty about what their obligations are. This is exceptionally important for the financing entities as well. None of the obligations would be changed, however, under the authority we're granting here. Next slide, please. Another key amendment is the addition of the concept of force majeure, which is a contractual concept whereby it is already in the contract in events of war, strikes, natural disaster, et cetera, that delays performance. We have specifically included pandemic, given the current situation and likelihood of further disruptions. However, we've included certain requirements for notice, for making sure the problems don't get as bad as they could, and ensuring that that's actually a true cause for delay. We had some other minor points here, and forgive me, some repeated points. Track D3 is another component that may include affordable housing. And so we want to be sure there's not a prohibition on tax exemption, on selling to a tax exempt user. All the other parcels that the developer's acquiring would be subject to that prohibition on sale to a tax exempt user to make sure that the URA can receive the tax increment financing in the future. Dropping down to the bottom, we talk again about assignment rights and then how the authority is consenting to assignments and sales, which we'll go through a bit in the future. And then simply because we have a plat and we know more what the property is going to look like, we'd be swapping out Exhibit B. Next slide, please. Before I move on to this part, can I just ask if there are any questions on those key amendments? I apologize for the lateness. We were negotiating the MDA up until this morning, and that's why the red line and document didn't make the packet until then. But those are the key points of a very lengthy document. So, if there are no questions, you can certainly save them till the end. The resolution tonight, although consent is not required for everything, the direct sales to affiliated entities, we wanted to ensure that the board was aware of that. Down below, you can see that each of the tracks is going to be conveyed to a different limited liability company that is associated with the developer. In your packet, there's a chart describing how these are all related. And then the bottom tracks, E and J, which are the park and drainage sites, and then in the northwest corner, another drainage site, are ultimately going to be conveyed to a homeowners association that will maintain those properties. The assignments that do require the consent of the authority are at the top, where generally the redevelopment obligations under the master developer agreement are going to be conveyed to another LLC called Greyhound Park Master Developer LLC, which will contract for construction. I think they have a contractor spun up and pretty ready to go with that. And D2, which is again that affordable housing partner, will be transferred to a limited liability, limited partnership, of which, if you go down and see the one below for track D2, the general partner will be Greyhound Park Apartments, GP LLC. And the other partners in that, I believe, Ms. Quander, include the Housing Authority and will include other perhaps lenders, I think. And so that gets into the complexity that I'm not going to delve into today. But we've made sure that all the development obligations stay with entities that will perform and have ensured that the obligations run with the land so that these transactions don't alleviate the responsibilities of the redeveloper to build as we expect. Next slide, please. And I promise we're moving quickly forward. The resolution, as I mentioned, authorizes the staff level approval for the deeds to actually convey the property to all the entities. An escrow agreement was previously approved to be approved at a staff level, but we included it here just for clarity's sake. A reimbursement agreement, which has been not been yet negotiated, but it relates to those tracks A and B, which are the commercial and educational parcels. There's an entitlement under the existing agreement whereby the redeveloper gets paid back from some of the proceeds of sale for when we ultimately do sell those properties. Some of the portions of those proceeds will go back to the redeveloper to pay for some of the improvements that serve those tracks, not the one the developer is developing. Construction licenses and easements to do the work on the URA's site. A maintenance agreement, as I mentioned before, for that stormwater on the northwest corner and in the center, and the private park in the center of the property, where the owners of tracks A and B will have a contract with the homeowners association, this maintenance agreement, to pay for those improvements, maintenance. And then finally, the affordable housing loan documents that we'll go through in detail. Next item, please. As I mentioned in the maintenance agreement, essentially the split is that tract A, which is the educational parcel on the northwest side of the property, would bear 7% of the cost, and tract B to its south would bear 14% of the cost, starting once all of the improvements, the roads, et cetera, are built. That would include the URA contributing to that while the URA owns it. And we have negotiated that agreement, and a draft is in the packet. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and the only thing I would just add on to that, Mr. Sheasley, if I may, is that upon the sale of tracks A or B, that responsibility will become the responsibility of the new owner. So ideally, that commercial parcel gets developed or gets sold and developed, and that new company will take on those maintenance obligations.
Thank you. And that HOA is also one of the tools for ensuring the trash cans in the park are kept, et cetera, that those are self-contained responsibilities within the property. And then for the loan, Caitlin.
So as Robert outlined, and many of you are aware, one of the commitments that was provided related to the desire really on behalf of this board, and that the county and Del West want to see an affordable housing component of this project. In order to close those gaps, Del West a year ago indicated they needed $3.75 million in addition to the various other capital stack pieces of their loans, et cetera, to make the affordable housing project come together. That commitment was made. The city loaned those dollars to the Urban Renewal Authority to be paid back by Del West. And so the concept of the loan was outlined within our agreements. Now, the details were not. So we have spent the last couple of months negotiating those details of the loans, and included within the packet is a loan term sheet that summarizes those terms, and some of the key ones are here on this slide as well. And then there will be a separate loan agreement, deed of trust, and note along with some assignment documents that would bring the loan terms that are outlined here to life and be part of our closing package. So the short of it again is that the loan is for $3.75 million. And the agreement was to do that at a customary LIHTC rate. So we have agreed to a 1% interest, which compounds annually. There's a 5% default rate. One of the kind of more typical approaches in affordable projects is that you wait until stable, while interest exists, it does not begin to have to be paid until the property is actually stabilized and the tenants move in and it's collecting rent, because you don't want to place additional burdens on a project that is already really tight. So you see a 30-year term that the 30 years begin at the beginning, but the payments begin once stabilization occurs. And then we have a different cash flow model for the first 10 years after stabilization at a cash flow of 12%. And then after that, the cash flow moves up to a 35% cash flow. We did negotiate a couple of relevant provisions that I think the board would be interested in the sense of if they go to refinance this, finance the other equity, because we're one of 6 lenders on this project, because affordable housing is tough to develop. And so you have CHAFA, you have Wells Fargo, and two ways involved, and you have the Colorado Division of Housing with 2 different loans as well. So there's a lot of people working on this project to make it happen. And one of the pieces we negotiated was that if those other senior loans are renegotiated and Del West or its borrower entity are taking out some equity, not just a refinancing, but they're actually taking out equity from the project, that we would need to be paid down in a proportionate amount of their equity. So kind of the opportunity that if they are going to be taking dollars out of the project, which is not anticipated, but if it were to happen, that we would be at the table and be able to eat down that loan amount as well. Our deed of trust, as I noted, there's a number of other lenders, and it's been our understanding that we would be pretty subordinate and farther down on that list. And we've kind of known that going into it. And again, there's some additional kind of consent rights around refinancing, as I noted. The other piece that was negotiated is, as you may recall in the master development agreement, there is an opportunity that if Tract A, the commercial parcel, is sold within the first 5 years, that those dollars that come in from the gross proceeds of that sale, they go first to repay the redeveloper for the public improvements that they made that are benefited by Tract A. So some of the roads that go around the side, for example. And then second, it would go to potentially being used by whoever buys that property to complete public improvements as a bit of an incentive to sell that commercial parcel. And then third, there are just the gross proceeds, what's left, right? And what it is under the MDA currently is that those are 50-50 split between the authority and the redeveloper, because they are marketing the site for us. What we've negotiated here is that we would retain 25% of their 50% as an additional pay down on the loan from that tract. So again, kind of an opportunity that if Del West is making money, that we are seeing our loan get paid off as well. So happy to answer any additional questions on the loan terms, but that should be a high level.
Just to add to that, on the master development agreement, that 5-year participating interest term would kind of, the clock would restart on that as well with this amendment, just so everyone is clear. But we felt that was a fair trade. So I believe that is the last slide, and we welcome any questions. I know this is a tremendous amount of information. I think it shows how complicated this deal is and how much work there is left over the next couple of weeks to get to closing, including negotiating what the actual loan and documents look like. But we're much better off than we were. These changes preserve the affordable housing and put it right at the top of the work to be done, as well as that school district payment is preserved. So those key components of the IGAs with the other taxing entities were not affected by this as well. Nor was the fire district, Mr. Fairfield. So just to make sure. And so the final slide, if you didn't see it in the packet, you don't need to pull it up. Dylan says the staff recommends approval of the resolution.
Commissioner Noble.
Thank you so much. I can see how much work went into this. Very impressive. And the new changes are very excellent also. I, however, have a question about information from our last meeting that wasn't discussed again tonight, and it wasn't discussed last week either. And that was about the environmental exclusion regarding no use of groundwater at the site. I want to know if that involves the dioxane that was found on the property, or what it may be. I think we need to discuss it.
It does, and Caitlin, I believe, can speak to what the deed restriction or the covenant that's being put on the property is, and kind of the CDPHE process that's going on.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Commissioner. You are correct. As a result of the VCUP, one of the recommendations that comes out, and frankly requirements from CDPHE, is the recording of an environmental covenant on the entirety of the property, which places everyone on notice and restricts the use of groundwater. So you cannot use groundwater. It certainly was not Del West's intention to ever use groundwater, and they are very closely involved in the VCUP process and kind of are going into it with eyes wide open for sure. But this covenant, by being recorded, makes sure to put any potential future purchaser and in fact tenants on notice. It's required to be put into leases that you cannot use groundwater. So that is prohibited. That covenant is currently in its notice period. So there's a 30-day notice. Mailed notice went out. Publication was on the 4th, I believe, off the top of my head. So once that is completed, we do not expect any objections or comments, but certainly have to go through that process with CDPHE. Then that covenant will be recorded against the property and bind the property for the foreseeable future.
And what was it that the CDPHE said? Why are they so concerned that they would have this covenant?
And maybe Rick, if you could, I see Rick Wells is on as well. I think it's the abundance of caution with the results that we're seeing. There are other water sources that can be used here, and so prohibiting the use of groundwater is the recommended safest path.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm on mute.
You're good.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so the dioxane levels, as you indicated, are above the EPA limits, and that's why they prohibited the use of water. The further testing that they've done did not show any indications of vapor issues associated with the dioxane, and it's because it is at such low levels. Having said that, radon mitigation, which is pretty normal in all buildings and is going to be employed at this location, will further mitigate any potential vapor impact, although the CDPHE found that was not an issue. So the VCUP is addressing all of the known and anticipated issues associated with the site.
Thank you. And I think, yes, thank you very much.
Commissioner Grimes, you had a question?
I do. I just wanted a little clarification on the addition of a force majeure clause and what specifically related to the pandemic would allow that to be put into effect.
Let me pull up, Caitlin, feel free to speak if you've got the right answer, because you touched the document most recently. So.
Yeah, Commissioner, thanks. I just pulled up the provision in the contract. So Del West did request an addition of a force majeure. We had a force majeure clause. They requested to add potential pandemics to the force majeure, and it is on, it's on page 12 of the red line that was provided. But in short, we were agreeable to that with two main restrictions. One is it can't just be, oh, there's a pandemic. It has to be a government order associated with the pandemic, which would prohibit the ability to do work. For example, if you suddenly cannot have, if construction is halted, for example, by government order, or if you can't have, more than 3 workers on site at any time, or so some sort of restriction. So it is government order related. And then the second piece of it is that we required a 10-day notice. So as soon as they identify the potential for exercising this provision, they have to provide us with notice, and we can essentially review and potentially agree or disagree with it. So, and then I would say just their delay has to be as limited as possible, and they have to provide continuing updates about, whether the government order is still in place or it's been lifted and they can move forward, et cetera.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the feedback.
Any other questions? Seeing no other questions, this is the end of your presentation and we're ready for a motion.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm looking for a motion and a second to adopt resolution URA 2020-04. Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Commissioner Hurst.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution URA 2020-04. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, your meeting, the secretary does not need to read the title. We'll take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Madera,
Yes.
Commissioner Alan Thomas,
No.
Commissioner Noble,
No.
Commissioner Wardiola,
Yes.
Commissioner Hurst,
Yes.
Commissioner Grimes,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Fairfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Frank,
Yes.
Chair Huseman.
Yes.
Motion carries with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 ayes and 2 nays.
Thank you. That concludes everything we have on the agenda for the URA meeting. So I will adjourn that meeting and in a moment call the special city council special meeting to order. So thank you, commissioners, for your presence, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time,